This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Larkey! Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front!
Hello and welcome back to another winning podcast. Win number 3 for the year. They've done it. It was a nervous game, a very nervous game. Not a great game to view for a neutral fan at all, and probably not a great game for a North fan. But a win is a win at this point. They are pretty hard to come by, so we will definitely take the win. And it is good to win one that you're supposed to win. Most games that we play, we're not supposed to win them. And this one, with a few injuries, it looked as though it was a bit more of an even contest, but if we want to be serious about moving up the ladder, we had to win this game, and we did. West Coast win on Friday night makes it a little bit more spread out at the bottom of the ladder now. Even if we were to beat them next week, we'd have to win by a little bit now to go above them on percentage. So, second last is looking the most likely finish for us now, which we're pretty familiar with. We've been pretty good at finishing second last or last over the past 5 years. Yeah, I guess let's try and unpack what was a pretty bizarre game, a frustrating game to watch. Despite the win, it was a really, particularly that first quarter. I'll talk about it in a minute, but it was an awful first quarter considering the way things ended up. We'll just go through a regular podcast. We're about to jump into team selection. We'll get to what I thought was the story of the game. We'll do the North Podium votes, look at some positives and negatives, and then look ahead to next week. It's crazy to think how close we are to the end of the season now. And just a relief, honestly, to get another win. Equal our tally from last year. So got a couple of opportunities now to go one better, potentially. And obviously next week being the best of those. But anyway, I digress. Let's talk about the game against Richmond. Team selection, unfortunately, a couple of forced changes. So in pink, McKercher and Ford, and out Logue, Wardlaw and Sheezel, with Robert Hansen Jr. being the sub. So Pink came in for Logue, who unfortunately hurt his wrist, and by the sounds of the press conference after the game, he's not going to play in the last month, which is such a shame. He's worked so hard to come back from the ACL injury. He's managed to only get 2 games, and then he's back out. I guess, looking at the positive side, it's great that he was at least able to play a couple of games, but it would have been great to have him next week. So Pink came in for him, and we played Pink forward, so Charlie Common went back. Boy, did he look sore. I'm not sure what the story is there in terms of potentially we just had no other options, but goodness, he looks pretty banged up, does Chom. Kirch came in, and Ford both came in off their little niggles. So Sheezel was managed, and Wardlaw, unfortunately, concussion symptoms. So it sounds as though from the press conference that he's unlikely to be back for next week, just based on when the concussion symptoms started. Look, hopefully it's just minor. Hopefully he's okay and it's just precautionary now. But a bit of a worry with this double up with concussion symptoms. Great to have McKercher and Ford back in the side, but we'd definitely like to have Wardlaw in there. I think I liked the balance of the side and what the makeup of it going in, playing slightly smaller down defence than we were earlier in the year, with only the 2 bigs, so to speak. In this game, it was Corr and Combin, with the 3 talls up in the forward line with Larkey, Teakle and Pink in this match. I like the balance. I like the fact that we persisted with Hansen Jr., albeit as the sub. So, over the past 3 games, essentially, he's played 2 games worth of footy. Deserves a chance to show whether he's worth another year on the list. I think probably based on what we've seen from these 3 games, I'd be leaning towards no, but I do think, he deserves the chance. I suspect maybe he's only got 1 more game left in him or none. Who knows? Maybe he doesn't play next week. It'd be good to get a look at someone like Blake Drury instead, potentially. I think it's worth a shot. And then obviously the only other thing to do with the team was Luke McDonald's 200th game, which is fantastic. He's been a real whipping boy of late, and certainly some of that is earned. I don't think some of the criticism coming his way has been unfair, but you can't deny his heart and his ability to socially impact on the group. He's been the co-captain for the last couple of years with Jai, and obviously a father-son. It's any player that gets 200 games, they've got something. He won that best and fairest several years back now and played phenomenally well, and he's been a pretty consistent performer this year. No games where I thought he's been a standout, but a lot less mistakes than last year, a lot more consistent, and generally has been able to do his job. We know that he's not an amazing kick, but more of a penetrating distance kick, and we know that at times his disposal can be, or his decision-making rather, can be a little bit questionable, but holistically speaking, I think as the team has gotten better this year, he's gotten better. And as I say, anyone who makes it to 200 has clearly got something. So well done to McDonald. And, I do think it's worth, acknowledging that because it's a big achievement. Match result was North Melbourne 14-6-90 defeats Richmond 10-17-77. So a 13-point win at Marvel Stadium. And yeah, like I alluded to earlier, it was a really poor start. It seemed like we were playing a bit of a challenge. Who can make the most errors early on? The first quarter was awful. Richmond got out the blocks a lot better than we did, and they were able to hit the scoreboard. But yeah, it was just turnover city for both sides. Richmond's first goal came after maybe 6 or 7 turnovers in quick succession. We were just flip-flopping the ball back and forth. We certainly got better as the game went on, and I thought the third quarter we really peaked. That was where we played our best footy or our most consistent footy. And then, we managed to hold on late, but it certainly was not a game you'll be looking forward to watching back. Bar some specific highlights. There were some fantastic highlights, but I would not be watching or rewatching the game in its entirety. There was some real low points. Yeah, and at times, Richmond really dominated the territory battle. They had more scoring shots than us, more inside 50s, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But we were just able to be a bit more efficient, a bit more clinical. And to be honest, we made scoring look easy at times. That was probably the difference. When we went forward, it either slung shot right back out or we kicked a goal. Whereas for Richmond, it hung around inside their sort of 80 metres or around the 80-metre mark from their goal, which is an area of the ground that we're pretty good at possessing the ball, really, in our defensive half. But yeah, it was a really odd game, an error-prone game. It certainly looked like 18th playing 17th, particularly in the first half. The first half was very scrappy. The game did get a little bit better in terms of the skill level as it went on, but certainly looked like two sides that were battling it out for potentially the wooden spoon or avoiding the wooden spoon, as it were. Story of the game. This is an interesting one. At times I felt like we were playing a version of ourselves. And what I mean by that is, as I alluded to before, Richmond really struggled to score, but the ball lived in their sort of their half of the ground. They'd work really hard and then often score a couple of points in a row, and then it'd go up the other end and we'd score. And, we've all watched those North Melbourne games where we've got momentum for a little while, but we struggle to put the score on the board. And then the other team goes up the other end and kicks a couple of quick goals. And that is exactly what was happening, but we were the beneficiaries this time. It was Richmond that would have the momentum for a bit, really not put it on the scoreboard, maybe kick a goal where they should have kicked 3 or 4. And then as soon as Richmond kicked a goal, there was a couple of times where they'd kick a goal after a big period of territory domination, and then we'd win the centre clearance and kick the goal straight away and peg them right back. Several examples of that. It was an odd game to watch from that perspective because we've certainly been on the other end of that. Richmond, like I said, had 16 more inside 50s and 7 more scoring shots, but ultimately we won by 13 points. So it's just that they weren't able to put damage on the scoreboard when they had possession. And certainly when we did eventually get it, we were either clinical or not. But the ball didn't spend anywhere near as much time in the forward half of our ground. It was being scored or it was slingshotting back out. That being said, we nearly doubled their marks. We had more disposals, but a lot of them came in our back half. And as per usual, we struggled to transition out. It was a classic game of North Melbourne trying to kick it out of defensive 50 and getting stuck in that wing area, and then it going back towards our defensive 50 and our defenders having to propel from there and try and keep it back out. It was a lot of ball spent in that part of the ground. But look, to be honest, none of it matters when Richmond weren't able to put it through the big sticks. They were a little inaccurate at times, 17 points. But, I think part of that came from our pressure. We put on some great pressure defensively, and our defensive group as a whole I thought was, not perfect, but pretty good. But yeah, it was interesting to be on the other side of that and kind of experience that ease of goal scoring when you've felt like you've been up against it for a while. It was a frustrating game to watch, so I would imagine that there'd be plenty of teams that have played us over the past couple of years that have experienced that feeling of frustration, of feeling like, God, we should be better than this, and then all of a sudden you score a couple and you can relax a little. Yeah, for mine, that was really from quarters 2, 3, and 4. That's how it felt. The first quarter was a bit different. It was, like I said, really error-prone, and Richmond were the better side, but they were the less bad side in that first quarter. But yeah, I thought after quarter time we steadied, and whilst we certainly didn't win the territory battle, we did win the possession battle. We were getting a lot more uncontested possessions, and just weren't able to often turn that into an inside 50. But when we did, we were able to be effective and far more effective than Richmond were. Hence, winning by the 13 points. So let's have a look at the 5 stars from the game. Look at the North Podium. If you are a new listener, well, welcome. It's nice to be talking after a win. This is where I will rate the top 4 performing North Melbourne players and the best opposition player, and then we'll tally the votes and see who is on top of the podium, or the North Podium, at the end of the year, which is coming up very quickly. This was an easy 4 stars, or 4 points, 4 votes. Luke Davies-Uniacke, LDU, clearly for me the best on ground. 33 disposals, 3 goals. So to be scoring 3 goals as well as racking up possessions, it's hard to go past. 6 marks, 8 clearances, 3 goal assists, 7 inside 50s, 9 score involvements, went at 82% disposal effectiveness, and had 30 pressure acts, which was the most on the ground. So all in all, he was the one that was having impact when we needed it. Often it was his possessions that were either, he was kicking it through the big sticks, or he was winning clearances that was leading to goals. He was the reason that we were scoring a lot of the time. Had a massive impact both with his goals and his assists and his clearance work. We saw plenty of bursts out of stoppage, which is obviously his trademark. And I thought when the game was there to be won, he had the most impact on us winning. Certainly not a perfect game. He did make a couple of clangers, which is usually good for a clanger or two a game. Had 2 pretty bad ones. We had a shocking inboard kick that got intercepted and immediately kicked a goal for Richmond. And similarly, a bit later in the game, he was just taking too long. He often tries to take on a couple too many tacklers, but that's one of those things that I think he will get better at as the rest of the team gets better, because it'll feel like he's got more time, I guess. But yeah, got caught holding the ball, and Richmond, and that was in our back half too, which is why it hurt. And Richmond were able to kick a goal there. So 2 goals from LDU turnovers, but that's going to happen when you try and take the game on, when you've got the ball so much. He's not a perfect player. He's playing in a side that is far from perfect, and all the positives that he contributed far outweighed his negatives. So 4 votes for LDU. He was absolutely sublime, and great to see him hitting the scoreboard with the 3 goals as well, because we know historically he hasn't been a massive goal scorer. 3 votes I've given to Nick Larkey. It's one of those things where often when he's kicking 2 or 3, he's around about the mark, but he kicked 5 today, so it's pretty hard to go past him. 12 disposals, 5 goals, 8 marks, 2 of those contested. And yeah, I thought had a really clinical game. He did have 1 mark inside 50 that kicking at goal, he didn't quite make the distance, but aside from that, 5 goals straight. Made a couple of the kicks going inside 50 look better than they were. And I just thought benefited from a better service from LDU. He's starting to connect really well with Harry Sheezel, who had a couple of great kicks to him. And yeah, I just thought barely made a mistake, was the only player for both sides taking marks inside 50 consistently. He had 6 of them. The next best was 3 for Brown from Richmond. So he was really clunking them and finding space. And I thought, yeah, as a result of, getting a little bit better service than he has in previous weeks, he was able to hit the scoreboard. And yeah, it's hard to go past 5 goals. He's definitely worthy of being in the votes. You could probably argue if he's third or fourth best, but yeah, I've given him the 3 votes because I thought his 5 goals and his impact, he was just so efficient. You know, if he only kicks 2 goals 3, for example, or 3 goals 2, it's a very close game, and we don't win. So super important that he kicks accurately, and he did. 2 votes, and it's great to welcome this bloke back to the votes. It's been a while since he's polled. He was great at the start of the year, and that's Tommy Powell. He was pretty unlucky not to score last week. I thought, you know, he accumulated a lot off halfback last week, but the work that he did in this particular game, I thought, was even better, despite not getting the ball as much. 21 disposals, 1 goal, 8 marks, 8 tackles, a couple of clearances, and went at 100% disposal effectiveness. I just thought he was more damaging than last week. He didn't waste a possession. His goal was a fantastic crumbing goal that was one of those where the ball would come out of the centre. We'd got the clearance forward with a quick kick. He hit that next contest, crumbed it, and then kicked the goal from 50 or 45 metres out with his raking right foot. I just thought he had a really impactful game. Consistently found space in the corridor as well. I've noticed that the spot that he likes to, I guess, take possession of the ball is at half back, but in that central corridor, and then he looks to either hand pass to someone with a forward ball, or he looks for another sort of 25, 30 metre kick. Which is part of why he can be so effective. He's not generally taking on tricky kicks, but he hits those kicks that give out the rest of his teammates some space and some time, and plays through that corridor. So a fantastic game from Tommy Powell. Looked really close to that form that he had early on in the season. And like I said, a bit of a make good, because I thought he was really good last week too, and unlucky to miss out. So Tommy Powell too. And then there's plenty of players that were unlucky to miss out, so I will talk about a few shortly, but I've given the 1 vote to Harry Sheezel. It certainly wasn't his best game for the year. He's relatively quiet by his very high standards. 29 disposals, 5 marks, 3 tackles, 6 clearances, 6 inside 50s, and crucially had 3 goal assists. Yeah, I just thought his kicking inside 50 had to be rewarded. Like I mentioned earlier, he's starting to form a really good connection with Nick Larkey up there, which is fantastic. And I just thought, if there's one player on North Melbourne's side that I would want kicking for my life, if he has to kick it inside 50 and hit a target, it's Harry Sheezel and then Daylight. He had some really smart kicks that, resulted in goals. He had the 3 goal assists, building a great connection with Larkey, and just another vote takes him a little bit closer to the top of the podium. So just to recap those, 4 to LDU, 3 to Larkey, 2 to Powell, 1 to the Shees. Plenty of unlucky players in the win. Tristan Sherry is desperately unlucky. I thought he was really good in the ruck, 20 disposals, 6 marks, took a contested one. His usual 10 tackles, 45 hit-outs, 11 of those to advantage. He thought he had some pretty solid around the groundwork, but like I said, I just thought Shees' inside 50 kicking was probably just that little bit that got him across the line. I thought Bailey Scott had another good game, like he did a couple of weeks ago, 28 disposals and kicked a goal, which was the sealer. And I thought our backline held up really well. Aiden Corr and Jackson Archer were both fantastic, and again, probably unlucky not to vote. Corr had 23 disposals, 13 marks, 2 of those contested, and 9 intercepts, which was the equal most with Charlie Comben. Jackson Archer, 20 touches, 8 marks, 5 tackles, 8 intercepts, and a few of his marks were contested as well. Like I said, Chom had 9 intercepts. So, a lot of unlucky players, but that's what we want to have. We want to have players performing so well that we've got some unlucky players. I thought any of those could have been sort of in the 2s and the 1s. I definitely think that LDU was best on, and I definitely think Larkey was in the best 4. But you could mount an argument that Powell and Sheezel could be swapped out for Sherry or for Scott or for Corr or for Archer. I thought all of those players really performed and played their role. And given how much ball there was inside defensive 50, Corr and Archer were fantastic. I'll talk about Archer a little bit later on. In terms of the best opposition player, I think it had to go to Baker. He was a little wasteful, but he was the one that in that second half looked like he could potentially drag Richmond back into it. He had 2 goals, 3, and plenty of the footy. And I just thought, if he'd been a little bit more accurate, it's probably a different story. Taranto was good in the middle, and Nankervis was great in the ruck. I thought Sherry won, but it wasn't necessarily, he didn't belt Nankervis by any stretch. But yeah, I think Baker's 2 goals and 20 plus touches was super impactful. And like I said, he was the one that if Richmond were going to get across the line, he was going to have a big impact on the game. In terms of what the podium is looking like, with 3 games to go, where it's still pretty tight at the top, but Sheezel is getting close to wrapping it up. He still leads on 39 votes. LDU has moved to a direct second place on 34, and Tristan Sherry remains on 30. So that's what the top looks like. Sherry would have to be a monumental effort for Sherry to win now, but LDU is definitely still a chance, only 5 votes behind Shees. And then after them, it drops off. Tommy Powell's up to 4th on 12 votes, Cam Zurhaar 11, Charlie Comben 10, and then Wardlaw, McKercher and Larkey on 9 votes. So I do think that's a fair reflection of, generally speaking, how our players have performed across the season. There's a couple of players there that have had some good games, but not necessarily consistently across the season. But the 3 consistent performers, Sheezel, LDU, and Sherry, absolutely deserve to be on the podium. And yeah, only 3 games to go. So you'd think it's down to Sheezel and LDU as to who's going to finish on top. But mathematically speaking, Sherry's still a chance. Yeah. At this point in the podcast, I'd just like to give a bit of a call to action. Please help me get the word out there with any North Melbourne fans that you know. I do think I'm going to be covering some of the AFLW this season, so it'd be great to jump on board, even though the AFL season's going to be wrapping up shortly. There's going to be a bit to talk about. Please subscribe on your chosen podcast service. Give me a rating or review if you can. Get involved with my social media accounts at NorthPod Show. If you would like another way to support the show, you can go to my Buy Me a Coffee. It is in the show notes, or it's www.buymeacoffee.com/NorthPodShow. And I'd like to thank Dylan Black, who bought me some coffees during the week. Really appreciate it, Dill. Super pleased to hear you've converted your wife. And yeah, if you'd like to support me like Dylan did, I do promise to buy some Cokes with the funds, as I'm not a coffee drinker. Okay, let's look at the negatives first. It's where I like to live, in the negative space. And, despite it being a win, there were some things to talk about from the negative perspective, because like I said, it was a pretty shocking game at times. The first quarter in particular was awful. Anyway, we'll go through the points here. Easy first one. The goals we conceded from turnover was a massive issue. I mentioned the 2 LDU clangers earlier on that were, directly scored from. But often it just came from a poor kick to a contest up forward that ended up being turned over, and Richmond were able to shred us up through the middle. They had a couple of really good handballing chains where they just, ran through us like we did to Geelong at the start of last game. It was reminiscent of that, just sort of running forward power. So we've really got to be better at creating a stoppage in our forward half. And that's where that tackling needs to improve. So, we're familiar with the fact that's been an issue for us, that forward half pressure for most of the year. And that's where a lot of that score from turnover happened. There was obviously some scores from turnover where it just, we had a shocking kick like LDU's one, or a shocking disposal or a dropped mark that led to a turnover. I wouldn't say there were any absolute howlers like we had last week with Geelong in terms of clangers, but there were just too many disposals that were a little awry, too many marks that we probably should have taken, which leads to turnover and gives the opposition opportunity. And like I mentioned, Liam Baker was pretty good at taking opportunities to score, at least, even if he didn't nail all of those shots on goal. Yeah, that was our biggest weakness today, was conceding scores from turnover. So I do think on most occasions it's as a result of our offense not giving our defenders a chance, in that we've left them too high and dry, and the ball comes in far too quickly. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's on those forward half players creating a contest out of a 50-50 and getting us a stoppage if they can't win it, as opposed to letting the opposition grab the ball and rebound quickly. So Ford and Zurhaar had 2 tackles. Duursma, Hansen Jr. and Pink had 1 tackle. And Teakle and Larkey had 0 tackles. Sure, 2 tackles is okay, but to have 1 and 0 from 5 of your forwards, albeit there's some tools in there, we need more. We definitely need one of our forwards to be racking up 4 or 5 or 6 tackles and creating that pressure in the forward half so that we get some stoppage. Even if they're not inside 50, there were plenty of times where we would kick it to a player just outside 50 in that 60 or 70 metre range to a contest that we lost as a 50-50 and Richmond would take it up the other end. We've got to turn those opportunities in those instances where we can into at least a stoppage so that we can set up and use our mids around the contest to try and create some goals, which honestly leads pretty well into the second negative. I think the midfield battle was probably a win to Richmond on balance. Which is pretty disappointing given our talent in that area. It wasn't a belting by any stretch. I think we definitely had the best midfielder on the ground in LDU, and probably I'd put Tommy Powell as the second best. I think we probably had the best ruckman in that. I think Sherry won the battle with Nankervis, but I think it fell off a little bit from there. I thought holistically the Tigers probably won. They certainly did win the clearance battle. They won the clearances 33-39. That's despite us winning the hitouts battle. I thought that Nankervis probably was a little bit better when he did get hands on it. He had 4 more hitouts to advantage than Sherry did. We won the contested possessions by 6, so it was pretty level. But yeah, I just thought that Richmond's mids gave them a bit more of an opportunity, which is, honestly why the ball spent so much of its time in the forward half of the Tigers, because Richmond were generally pretty good at winning it at the source and getting it forward. It certainly wasn't a case of them cutting us up like other midfields have done at various times. I think about, Geelong did a great job of that, but the Sydney game before that, we really got taught a lesson a couple of times by the Sydney midfield. In the second half. That wasn't the case in this game. It was just that they were able to edge the ball forward and get that territory, which I must have said about 16 times on the podcast so far. And yeah, I thought, like I said, I think Sherry won the battle. I thought that we definitely had the best mid, but Prestia and Taranto were pretty good and composed in traffic. They made some great decisions and were able to, generally speaking, probably come out on top. And watching it, you just kept waiting for it to turn. I thought there was several moments where I went, great, this is going to be a moment where we're going to get on top. And generally speaking, that would come after LDU's burst out of a stoppage or Sheezel's done something great. Or it looks like Sherry's getting on top. And then it just didn't happen. It just didn't quite turn for us, and we weren't able to get the ascendancy that we've been able to get in some other games, even if it has been through quick kicks as opposed to sort of composed strategic play. You look at this game, and this is definitely one that I think having Wardlaw would have helped. But I do think it was a systematic issue as much as anything. I don't think that we were set up as well as we could be around stoppage. So yeah, I think, holistically there's a bit to work on from the mids. But that being said, it is a more experienced midfield that Richmond has with Prestia, Hopper, Taranto, Nankervis are all pretty experienced campaigners. Richmond is an older side than us, even though they're on the way down as opposed to us on the way up. They've still got some experience to shed. Like Nankervis is getting on. Dustin's obviously getting on. They've still got a bit of experience to get rid of. So at times, they do have some experience around the footy. But yeah, I just think it'd be great to see us improving in that area. And the final negative, it's not such a bad one, but I just would have loved to see us shut the door on the Tigers a little earlier than we were able to. Bailey Scott's goal meant that the game was over with 2.5 minutes to go. So at that point, the game was sealed. But I really thought that we had opportunities to seal and close the game, 10 or 15 minutes before that. And we just weren't able to, be composed enough with the ball going forward. I thought our composure in the last 5 minutes was fantastic. There were some great passages that I will talk about. However, I think prior to that, we were rushing it a little. We were giving Richmond so many opportunities. We were a little bit fortunate that they kept missing. Look, it is a nitpick given we won. And at this point, we just need to figure out how to win. But I do think that's the next step for us, is not just winning, but having the game won by three-quarter time or early in the last quarter, so that you can, as a fan and as a player, relax a little bit and maybe kick a couple of steadying goals, as opposed to kicking the goal that keeps you just in front or gets you in front, having been playing from behind. I thought the defenders, given that the door was kept just slightly ajar up until very late, I thought Corr and Combat and Archer held up really well. Elmac back there as well, McKercher, of course. Yeah, I thought we held up really well. It'll just be about us getting a little bit more clinical and developing that composure, so we are able to seal the game. And for us in this one, it means that we're not just bombing it long to a contest. If there's other options, we're chipping it around and looking for those options, because in those late game situations, the opposition is going to go man to man, because they have to stop you playing that possession game, and often that's what allows you that space out the back or on the lead, because all of a sudden where someone was zoning, you've got leading space. Yeah, I just think that's something that we'll adjust to as we get a bit more used to being ahead at the end of the game, because, how many times have we been ahead halfway through the last quarter over the past 4 or 5 years? You could probably count it on one hand. So yeah, that's the other area that I'd like us to work on. But let's talk about the positives, because there was certainly some positives to come out of the game. I might start in a weird place. I just thought there were some players that, even though they were relatively quiet, across the course of the game, found ways to contribute. So I'm going to go through a handful of players here. I thought Will Phillips had a really impactful first quarter. I only ended up with the 15 touches and 6 tackles, so not a massive game, and certainly not one that you'd go, great, he's stamped himself as definitely worth of recontracting, but he snapped a goal in the first quarter that ended up being disallowed due to a questionable Sheezel throw. I think they get called play on 99 times out of 100, but the umpire was right there on the spot. So look, whatever. But that should have been a goal to him. But then a couple of minutes later, he took a mark inside 50 and goaled anyway. And then had a nice handball goal assist to LDU. So really contributed early on and was finding some space early on in the game. And as I said, finished with 6 tackles, so was doing what he could. And it was great to see him impacting, even though he certainly didn't have a fantastic game, but he found a way to have an impact. Stevenson's probably the opposite. It was a really weird game for Steve. I thought he struggled at halfback in the sort of first 2.5 quarters. It was one coming off halfback where he grabbed the hand pass on the way through and then kicked out in the full. We know that he's not the most physical bloke. Him running back into a contest is not something that he's confident in, and as a fan, you're not confident in him doing that. He went back with the flight trying to get a fist on a ball that was heading towards the goal line and essentially missed it. He may have scraped it, but he grazed it, but he more or less missed the footy. And that first half, you looked at it and went, this guy's done. Sure, we've got him on the books for another year, but there's no space for him. But then with Dylan Stephens going off subbed, it just gave Stevo an opportunity to come a bit further up the ground and play that kind of half-forward wing role. And he had a fantastic last quarter. I'd go as far as to say it was nearly an elite last quarter. He set up Scott with the sealer with a really good, cool inside 50 kick. Took time, didn't rush. And, like Shaw, his disposal for the rest of the game was a little bit questionable, but I thought, his last quarter was fantastic, and it just makes you wonder, is the wing the role that we could make work for him going forward, because it still allows him to have that run and carry that he's trying to have off half-back, but, he can play a bit more like Bailey Scott in that you're relying less on him nailing every kick. Sometimes it's okay if the winger just runs for 15 metres and kicks at 50, depending on the context of the game. So I don't know, that's an interesting one for me. I'm still on the fence around what we do with Steve-O next year, because it looks as though he's going to be edged out of that forward line. I really don't think we can play him off half-back, but potentially there's a role for him on the wing, maybe, or if you're rotating him through the wing and half-back and half-forward and there's some kind of utility role. Obviously, Liam Shields has done a bit of that this year, and I don't expect Liam Shields to be there next year, so maybe Steve-O can kind of play a role similar to what Shields has been playing, in that he's filling gaps on the field. But his last quarter was fantastic. I mean, Paul Curtis was really struggling for impact in this game, didn't hit the scoreboard, but last quarter won a really important contest on the wing. It was definitely one-on-one. You could argue he was kind of 2-on-1. Turned on a dime, hit Toby Pink, who then found Larkey 20 metres out. So that was a massive win that resulted in a goal for us at the crucial time in the game. So despite him really struggling to have an impact across the game, that big moment was massive. And then all of this comes to Zane Duursma, who on the score sheet, or on the stat sheet rather, super quiet game, kicked a point, but he had two really, really big highlights that show, that potential that we know is there. But two massive grabs. One of them, a really good contested pack mark in the first quarter. That's the one that he went back and kicked his point, but it was a classic Zane Duursma, came from the side. No one put a body on him, and he was able to get a good jump at it and take a really, really strong grab, which was fantastic. And then he bettered that in the second quarter with a really massive hanger. Just got a lot of airtime. That was more further up the ground, so not in a scoring opportunity, that one, but got the extra points by falling to the ground after he took the mark, which is super important. I've got no doubt that he'll have a Goal of the Week nomination for that. It's a pretty tough year for Mark of the Year. I think I said Goal of the Week. Mark of the Week, I mean. It's a pretty tough year for Mark of the Year, but that's going to be up there. It's probably not going to win it, but it's a massive mark, and just another glimpse at what kind of player he could be. He struggled to find the footy today, but if he keeps doing freakish things like that, there's definitely going to be a role for him. So yeah, I just thought it was good to have some of those players that were struggling to get their hands on the footy, that they found a way to have an impact on the game and really stamp their authority, which is what you want. You want your 18th and your 19th player contributing positively to the game, even if they're not going to, win it off their back like LDU did. Another positive, I thought the midfield kicking goals is a big win for us. It's an area of the game that we have struggled with over the last few years. We haven't had those goal-kicking midfielders that are able to hit the scoreboard as well as rack up 25 to 30 disposals. It certainly looks like Sheezel could be that kind of player, but he wasn't today. It was the rest of the mids. LDU kicked 3, like I mentioned, so that's obviously a big plus. But then Powell, Wilfield, Steve-O playing on the wing, Scott playing on the wing, all kicked 1. Which, these are not massive numbers except for LDU, but it's just important that we're able to generate goals from someone that's not named Nick Larkey. So to have 7 goals generated from the mids is a massive win. Just alleviate some of that pressure on the forwards. We know that Larkey is going to kick a bag if he gets service, but what that meant was it didn't matter that Zurhaar was only able to kick 1 and that Ford and Curtis weren't able to hit the scoreboard, because with Larkey kicking his 5 and the midfielders contributing, and you got 1 out of Teakle. That's all we need. We know that Teakle and Pink aren't going to be massive goal scorers, but they're straightening us up and giving those other players a bit more freedom. Like I said, great that we're able to have these goal kicking mids. It's something that I would love to see us build on next year. Simpkin's not a prolific goal kicker, although he is an accurate one. Georgie Wardlaw isn't proving to be a super prolific goal kicker. Wilfield and Tommy Powell, although actually I take that back. Tommy Powell, when he goes forward, he has been known to kick a goal or two, but Wilfield hasn't traditionally been a goal kicker. And Bailey Scott doesn't often chip in. So it's just, you'd love to have a couple of mids that you could rely on for, 20 goals, 25 goals a season. And I don't know that we have that at the moment. We've got Nick Larkey and Zurhaar and Paul Curtis, and then it does drop off a fair bit after that. Some more positives. I just thought it was fantastic to have some really great highlights that showcase what the future could look like, even though the game around that was pretty dour. I talked about Duursma's marks, which were fantastic. Sheezel's kicking inside in the forward half was immaculate. He had some really, really good vision and didn't bomb it long. He found some great options kicking inside 50 and kicking forward in the forward half. There was a moment where Big X had a tap down. It was half forward, probably 60 out, boundary throw in. I think it was a boundary throw in or a ball up, one of the two. Tristan Sherry had the tap down beautifully into LDU's lap. He ran a little arc, snapped a goal. It was, it was clearly a set play, something that had been drawn up at training several times, but that's one that you'd replay over and over again. LDU, of course, went straight to the bench after he kicked that goal. High-fived everyone on his way past. But yeah, man, that was a massive highlight. I would argue that was probably the best, football play of the day. There was bigger highlights like Duursma Specky, but that was the best football that we played, I thought, in terms of a 1-2 punch. And I mean, LDU in general was just breathtaking in terms of the way that he got generated speed and burst from stoppage. Jackson Archer is one that I definitely need to talk a little bit more about. He ran back with the flight so well, and intercept marking was on show again. It probably wasn't his best game, but he racked up a bit more disposal and was able to do a lot with his tackling and his marking. Both him and Charlie Common were trying to play that intercept game, whereas Aiden Corr was doing his best to lock down Dustin Martin or one of the other tools when they were down there. And yeah, I mean, it was fantastic. I thought Archer, it's actually unbelievable the second half of the season that he's had. He's gone from being a fringe player to an absolute lock in defence. He can play on the smalls. He can play on mediums if there's not a super dangerous small. He really shut Shai Bolton out of the game completely, I thought, and was able to get a bit of drive. His marking has improved greatly. His disposal is improving. It's still got a bit to go, but you don't get nervous when he's got the ball now. I just don't know that you want him biting off too much, but he's got really strong hands, and yeah, I think he's a real play for the future. He was definitely one of those ones that you thought, is he going to turn out? He's a son of a gun. Sometimes you pick up these father sons kind of hoping they turn out. But yeah, Jackson's been phenomenal. And yeah, I just think despite the dour 90% of the game, the highs were really high in this game. I did want to shout that out. And the last thing in terms of this game, I just thought it's fantastic that the contested marking for us is continuing. It's been an area over the past couple of years that we've struggled in, and that really, without a contested marking ruck, and with Larkey being our most prominent forward, who's more of a leading mark, we've struggled for contested marking. But we beat the Tigers 13-4. We had Larkey, Duursma, Corr, and Archer all with 2 contested marks, and another 5 players with 1. So super, super promising to get a bit of a spread there. We've seen Sherry's starting to take a few contested marks and marking it more around the ground. But yeah, I think getting or having the opportunity to contested mark a little bit more will unlock more for us, particularly in terms of our offense, because if we're able to take a grab on the wing, that's really going to help us with our options in terms of kicking it long. We know that's our bailout strategy, or at times it looks like it's our dominant strategy, is that kick long down the wing. And if that's going to work, we're going to need to be able to take some grabs in a contested fashion. So yeah, that's going to do it for the match review. It's super, super exciting to get the win. It's not a good game of football, but it doesn't matter. We've got our 3rd win for the year, and now we can relax a little bit, because it does look as though, unless there's some crazy results, we're going to avoid the wooden spoon, which, we've won a couple in recent periods. I think that's enough for us. I think it's time for Richmond to head down back to the bottom. Let's have a look at some other news. I'm recording this on Saturday night after the game, so the VFL hasn't happened yet, but that's a Sunday game against Williamstown. Williamstown is in the 8, so it's going to be a tough game, but it's a must win for us if we are going to contend for the finals. So hopefully that goes well tomorrow and there's no injuries out of that game. The big news from the week, I'm sure all of you would know by now, Cameron Zurhaar has signed on. He's turned his back on free agency, as the saying in modern media goes. He's signed for 5 years, so a solid but not ridiculous tenure. And yeah, I think it's super promising for the club. We know what Cameron Zurhaar is as a player. I think we just need to see him play more consistently at his best. We're not expecting him to turn into something that he's not. He's been at the club for 8 years now, hence the free agency. So we know what kind of player he is. It was really important that players in his age bracket stick around, because we need those players like him and Larkey, like Simpkin and McDonald. We need those mid-tier age bracket players, so that's not just a bunch of young kids out there getting smashed around. And hopefully that decision kind of frees him up to play his best footy. in the coming years. You would think that this might allow him, a bit of mental release, and we can figure out, hopefully he can get back to kicking 30 to 40 goals in a year. And, I know that's a lot of goals, but he's absolutely capable of that if he's playing full-time forward, which he is at the moment. He's played barely any time in the middle. I know every year there's that want to see him through the middle of the ground, but I do think we've probably got enough midfield talent now that we don't need to do that. And I want to see him work on his forward craft. So fantastic to sign him for 5 years, and no idea what the coin is, but I'm going to trust our list management that they've made the right call on that one. I would have to imagine that it sounds as though he didn't have any direct suitors, so at least we weren't having to directly bid with someone else or try and outbid someone else. I would imagine that he's towards the top of the pay scale, but not at the top, if that makes sense. Probably mid to top. I hope that's the case. I have no insight. But yeah, it was great to see the social media stuff with him and Nick Larkey and the group celebrating his signing. And it's just Bailey Scott now that we need to sign. It sounds as though from AFL media that he's likely to sign for 2 more years, which would take him to the 8 years free agency mark, which was where Zurhaar was or is at this point. But Scott is yet to sign that. Just rumoured at this stage, and he may not, but generally speaking, Cal Toomey and Riley Beveridge do tend to get most things right. So I expect Scott to sign, not too sure when. And then we did have Jackson Archer officially. His signing was announced during the week, although it had been widely reported in the media a little while ago. So there's a bit of a reaction on social media in terms of hasn't this already happened? But it hadn't been announced by the club, so that was officially announced. So great that Arch gets to be celebrated. And like I said, he's in absolutely ripping form at the moment. You'd almost wish if you were him that you'd waited a couple of weeks, because he might have sold himself a little short. He could have potentially got an extra year or a bit of extra coin the way that he's been playing in this second half of the year. But yeah, great to have Zurhaar and Archer officially signed. The other piece of news, it's less North Melbourne related, but it certainly is going to relate to the end of the year for us. The AFL made some announcements around academy and the draft and trade period, those kinds of things, just to give clubs the heads up in terms of this trade period and the next couple. So I'll just go through very quickly a couple of those things. As we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, academy kids are now going to be able to be bidded on at any point in the draft, not like it's been for the past couple of years where it's been after the 40th pick. They're going back to, if you've got someone in your academy and someone wants to draft them at pick 3, doesn't matter, you can match with points if they're in your academy. The draft value index, so what each draft pick is worth, is going to be changing, not this year but next year, which I think is to do with the fact that they're relaxing the draft, the academy system. All of these systems are connected, of course, and when I was listening to the AFL podcast, when they were talking about it, you got the sense that all of these things kind of, they're related to each other, and you can't really talk about them in isolation because they all have flow-on effects. But essentially, they're going to reduce the amount of draft points that are available to clubs to use on these academy picks or these match bidding systems. There's going to be less draft picks that hold points. So I can't remember the exact point, but the back end of the draft used to be able to accumulate some really late picks, and they would contribute some points. Whereas that's not going to be the case now, and those later picks are going to be worth less points. In conjunction with that, you used to get a discount on bidding because you were bidding on someone from your academy. That was 20%. It's going down to 10%. So you can see, or what I'm taking from this is that the AFL, over the next couple of years, is really keen for clubs to value their academy, but they're also really keen for clubs to have to pay an appropriate value to get those kids. So you look at the Gold Coast from the last draft period, they got 3 or 4 kids from their academy. I think it's highly unlikely that they would be able to do that in the future because of the amount of points that they would have to stump up. And they were able to match as early because of where they were coming from in terms of it being a Northern Academy. There's different academy systems, but I think they're all kind of going to be somewhat amalgamated into this new system. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there, but from my perspective, I think it's good for us because it's going to open up movement of players over the next couple of years, it does mean that if there are these academy players that we end up keeping an eye on, that we will be able to have access to them if it's worth it. And I think that's the thing. It might be that there's some players that come through an academy and are sort of going to get picked at 20 or 30, and a club might go, well, it's probably not worth us bidding on them because we actually have to pay close to market value, and we don't value them that highly. Whereas this current model, it's very rare that a club doesn't match the bid because it's been a bargain, which, it has its pros and cons. The other couple of things, that the future pick trading is going to be opened up to the next year. So you're going to be able to bid 2 years worth of future picks as opposed to one, which you've been able to do for a little while now. The free agency compensation calculations are changing a little bit. I don't know if that's going to impact us too much at the moment because we don't really have any players that are going to be leaving as free agents over the next couple of years now, unless, Bailey Scott in a couple of years. And then rookie listed players are going to be able to stay on the rookie list longer than previously if they've played less than 10 games or 10 or less, something like that. So you're going to be able to have a rookie for 5 years if they're really not playing. And the AFL talked about this as more for those, those taller players that you're picking and potentially investing in for a longer period of time. It gives you the opportunity to keep them around a little bit longer. So that's all the changes. I don't think any of those things are going to directly significantly impact us this year. Obviously, we would have been able to bid on Riley Sanders if this was, if he was in this draft. That would change our draft for this year. And I know there'll be some people that are upset about, retrospective stuff, but, we can't control that. I think let's go with the now. I think it's going to be great that there's going to be a bit more equality in the draft for the next few years, which is important because Tasmania coming in the next couple of years is going to shake things up, and it's important that we've got a couple of these really consistently equal drafts before that. And then one would hope that when Tasmania does come in, the academy systems still allows you to develop and grow players naturally, and then you just have to pay close to the market value for them. You get a little bit of a discount, but you've got to pay more or less what they're worth. So I think holistically that's a good thing for us as a smaller club. We want equalisation across most things, and I think this is going to be a positive for us moving forward, even if it's not necessarily been a positive for us retrospectively. And you could mount an argument about whether we needed Riley Sanders or whether we'd be more than happy with what we ended up with, because, Taylor Goad could become a great ruckman. Riley Hardiman looks like a player. Will Dawson looks like a player. They're the sorts of picks that we probably wouldn't have had, the players that we wouldn't have had if we'd had to match a bid on Riley Sanders, or had the opportunity to match a bid on Riley Sanders last year. Next week, we've got West Coast. So another winnable game down in Hobart. It's another Saturday 1:45 game. And I think the fact that we won against Richmond does take the pressure off us a little bit, but a win would be great. I'm not sure how much we have to win by to go past West Coast on the ladder, given their win, but just a win would be fantastic. Get us to 4 wins, get a bit of growth from last year. It's going to be pretty hard to win in the last 2 games against the Dogs and the Hawks, given that they're going to be ultra hungry to win this with their seasons still alive. So, look, you never know. We beat the West Coast over in Perth. Given it looks like we're going to be without Wardlaw and Logue again, it could be a challenge. Chom really looked banged up, so I don't know if potentially someone like Callan Dawson comes back in for Chom, because he looked pretty beat up, and it sounds as though we're not getting either of those two back. But yeah, look, it should be a wonderful game. Historically, we've played well in Hobart. It's been a dour period for us there, but it's been a dour period for us everywhere. So I do still think that we play that game, that ground relatively well. And, we'll give ourselves a big chance, because West Coast is going to have a big travel to get to Hobart. And hopefully we can put on a good show. I think that is going to do it for this podcast. I don't know about you, but I've been really enjoying the Olympics It is a shame that it's on in the middle of the night. You sort of get to watch a couple of hours before I go to bed, and then you wake up and see most of the interesting stuff that's happened, because generally speaking, the gold medal stuff isn't happening in the morning sessions Paris time. But look, I'm not going to complain about Olympics. It's more sport to watch, and there's been some great results for the Aussies. So hopefully there's some more good results for us to come in the second week, and then I can also look forward to the Paralympics after that. So I hope you too are enjoying the Olympics and enjoying the sports smorgasbord we've got going on at the moment. Have a wonderful week. Only 3 weeks of the season to go. 3 games of footy left, and it's nearly time for the AFLW, which is super exciting. Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier on in the podcast, I do plan to have a bit more coverage about the AFLW this year than I did last year, which should be great. So I'm going to let you go. I've been going a little long for this episode. Have a great week, and I will talk to you after the West Coast game. Hopefully, fingers crossed, after another win. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.